Jake Morrison stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. The massive room stretched out before him like a stadium, filled with hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy. Their voices created a constant buzz of different languages and sounds that hurt his ears. Some beings looked like giant insects, others like walking crystals, and some were just floating clouds of gas that somehow could talk. Morrison was tired. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 7 years now, and today felt like his hardest day yet. His gray hair was messy from running his hands through it, and his blue suit was wrinkled from the long journey to Nexus Prime. But he had to try one more time to make them listen. Standing next to him was Dr. Lisa Carter, the smartest scientist Earth had ever sent to the stars. She carried a small device that held all the proof they needed, but Morrison knew the Council would not want to see it. They never wanted to see anything that came from humans. The speaker of the council was a tall being made of what looked like living crystal. His name was Zephyrian, and he came from a place called the Helix Nebula. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. He did not like humans very much, and he made sure everyone knew it. "The human delegation may speak," Zephyrian said, his crystal body glowing with a cold blue light. Morrison stepped forward to the speaking platform. The room got a little quieter, but not by much. Most of the aliens were not paying attention to him. Some were talking to each other, others were looking at their own devices, and a few seemed to be sleeping. "Council members," Morrison began, his voice strong and clear. "I come before you today with urgent news. The threat we have warned you about for the past year is real, and it is coming. The beings we call the Void Hunters are moving toward our galaxy, and they will destroy everything in their path." A loud laugh came from the section where the Altarian delegation sat. The Altarians looked like giant slugs with multiple eyes, and their representative was named Vorthak. He was known for making fun of human warnings. "More human fear stories," Vorthak said, his slimy voice carrying across the room. "Your species sees danger everywhere you look. Perhaps you should stay on your small blue planet if you are so afraid of the universe." Morrison felt his anger rise but kept his voice calm. "Dr. Carter, please show them the data." Lisa stepped forward and activated her device. A large hologram appeared above the speaking platform, showing a map of space near their galaxy. Red dots marked places where civilizations had once lived but had gone silent in recent months. "These are the Kepler-7 colonies," Lisa said, pointing to a cluster of red dots. 3 million people lived there 6 months ago. Now there is nothing, not even debris. Their sun is still there, their planets are still there, but every living thing is gone. She moved her hand and the hologram changed to show another area. The Arcturus trade routes, 12 different species use these paths for thousands of years. In the past 4 months, not a single ship has come through. When our scouts went to investigate, they found empty space where busy space stations used to be. The room was getting quieter now. Some of the aliens were starting to pay attention, but many still looked doubtful. Zephyrian's crystal body flashed with brighter light. These places could have many reasons for going silent. Equipment failure, political problems, natural disasters. You cannot prove that some mysterious enemy has destroyed them. Morrison stepped forward again. "We can prove it because we have seen them. Our deep space monitoring stations detected massive ships moving through dark space between the galaxies. Ships bigger than any city, moving in formation toward the Milky Way. They consume everything they find, turning matter into energy to power their fleet." A new voice spoke up from the crowd. It belonged to Senator Krex, a reptile-like being from the Vega system. "Even if what you say is true, why should we trust humans to help us fight this threat? Your species has been in space for less than 200 years. What could you possibly know about galactic defense that we do not?" Dr. Carter activated another hologram. This one showed technical drawings of weapons and shields that looked far more advanced than anything the Council had ever seen. "We have been preparing for this threat since we first detected it. Human engineers and scientists have been working day and night to create new defensive technologies. We offer to share all of this with the Council, but only if we work together." Room erupted in noise as hundreds of aliens began talking at once. Some sounded interested, Others sounded angry, and many just sounded confused. Morrison could hear words like impossible and human tricks being thrown around. Zephyrian raised one of his crystal arms and the room slowly got quiet again. The Council appreciates the human offer, but we have concerns about human motivations. Your species is known for being aggressive and warlike. Perhaps this is simply an attempt to gain access to our military secrets. Morrison felt his patience finally break. His voice got louder and harder. Aggressive? We are trying to save your lives. In less than 2 years, the Void Hunters will reach the outer edge of this galaxy. They will start with the rim worlds and work their way in. Every day you wait is another day closer to total extinction. Enough. Zephyrian's voice boomed through the chamber like thunder. The Council has heard these warnings for months now. We have investigated your claims and found no solid proof of this supposed threat. Furthermore, the Council questions whether humans can be trusted as partners in galactic defense, given your history of violence and conquest on your own world. Morrison looked around the room at hundreds of alien faces. Some looked worried, others looked angry, but most just looked tired of hearing about human problems. He realized that nothing he could say would change their minds. They had already decided that humans were the real threat, not the Void Hunters. Then we are done. Here, Morrison said quietly. Dr. Carter, pack up the data. It seems the Council prefers to face the unknown alone. As they gathered their equipment, Lisa leaned close to Morrison and whispered, "What do we do now?" Morrison looked back at the Council one last time. Zephyrian was already calling for the next item of business, and most of the aliens had stopped, paying attention to the humans completely. "Now we go home and prepare for war," Morrison said. "If they will not listen to warnings, maybe they will listen to results." The two humans left the Great Hall, carrying with them the knowledge that they had just witnessed the beginning of the end for galactic civilization. The Council had made their choice, and soon everyone would live with the consequences. 3 years had passed since the humans vanished from the galaxy. The Galactic Council had almost forgotten about Ambassador Morrison and his warnings about the Void Hunters. Most Council members thought the humans had simply given up and gone, back to their small corner of space to sulk about being rejected. Then the outer rim world started going silent. It began with the mining colonies in the Kepler sector. These were tough places where different species worked together to dig valuable metals from dead planets. The workers there were used to danger and knew how to handle emergencies. When their communications stopped working, the Council thought it was just equipment failure. But when scout ships went to investigate, they found nothing. The planets were still there, the mining equipment was still there, but every living thing had vanished. There were no bodies, no signs of fighting, no clues about what had happened. It was like millions of people had simply disappeared into thin air. The first emergency session of the Galactic Council was called when 6 more systems went silent in the same week. Speaker Zephyrian stood at the center of the Great Hall, his crystal body flickering with nervous energy. The hall that had once been filled with hundreds of chattering delegates was now much quieter and more tense. "The situation in the outer rim is concerning," Zephyrian announced to the worried faces around him. "We have lost contact with 17 systems in the past month. Search and rescue teams are investigating, but so far they have found no survivors." Senator Krex from the Vega system stood up, his reptilian features twisted with worry. "This is not natural. 17 systems do not just go silent for no reason. Something is hunting us." Murmurs of agreement and fear rippled through the chamber. Many of the delegates were thinking the same thing, but none of them wanted to say it out loud. They were all remembering the warnings that the human ambassador had given them 3 years ago. Dr. Nara Voss, a blue-skinned scientist from the Andromeda colonies, activated a holographic display above the speaking platform. The display showed a map of the galaxy with red dots marking the systems that had gone silent. "Look at the pattern," she said, pointing at the display. "Whatever is doing this is moving in a straight line toward the galactic core. It is not random destruction, it is systematic consumption." The pattern was clear and terrifying. Something was eating its way through the galaxy like a plague, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The red dots formed a line that pointed directly toward the most populated areas of the galaxy, including Nexus Prime itself. Vorthak, the slug-like Altarian representative, spoke up with a trembling voice. "We need to contact the humans. They warned us about this. They said they had weapons that could fight these creatures." "The humans are gone," Zephyrian replied, his crystal voice ringing with frustration. "We sent envoys to their homeworld and found it empty. Earth is deserted, their colonies are abandoned, and their space fleets have vanished. It is like they never existed." This news sent a wave of panic through the chamber. Many delegates began talking at once, their voices rising in fear and anger. Some blamed the council for rejecting human help. Others wondered if the humans had been destroyed by the same enemy that was now hunting everyone else. Captain Jex Norin, a military officer from the Centauri Federation, stood to address the council. His uniform was covered with medals from decades of service, but now he looked older and more tired than anyone had ever seen him. "My fleet has been investigating the silent zones. What we found there defies explanation." Norin activated his own holographic display, showing footage from his ship's cameras. The images showed solar systems that looked normal at first glance, but something was wrong. Planets hung in their orbits around their suns, but they were completely lifeless. Not just empty of people, but empty of everything that had ever been alive. "Every planet we investigated was stripped clean," Norin continued. "No plants, no animals, no bacteria, nothing. The soil itself has been drained of all organic matter. It is like some force sucked the life out of entire worlds." The footage continued, showing space stations that hung empty in the void. The stations were intact, but every living thing inside them was gone. Personal belongings were still in place. Food was still on tables, but not a single biological organism remained. Dr. Voss studied the data with growing horror. The energy readings from these dead systems are off the charts. Something absorbed enormous amounts of biological energy from these places. We are talking about the equivalent of entire suns' worth of power. As the evidence mounted, the delegates began to realize the true scope of what they were facing. This was not a natural disaster or a war between species. This was something that treated all life in the galaxy as nothing more than food to be consumed. Then came the day when the outer sensor networks detected them. The Void Hunters had finally arrived in numbers large enough to be seen by the Council's monitoring systems. The images that came back from the deep space sensors made even the bravest military officers feel sick with fear. The enemy fleet was vast beyond imagination. Ships that looked like a horrible mixture of organic tissue and advanced technology stretched across light years of space. Each individual ship was the size of a small moon, but there were thousands of them moving together like a living organism. "By the ancient gods," whispered Commander Yalta from the Rigel system as she studied the sensor data. "How do we fight something like that?" The Void Hunter ships did not look like anything built by intelligent beings. They looked grown rather than constructed, with surfaces that pulsed like living flesh but were covered with metal and energy weapons. They moved through space like a swarm of hungry insects, consuming everything in their path. As the Council watched in horror, the enemy fleet reached the Altarian home system. The system had a population of 12 billion people spread across 4 planets and dozens of space stations. It was one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The attack lasted less than 6 hours. When it was over, the Altarian system still existed, but every living thing in it was gone. The planets remained, the space stations remained, even the artificial satellites remained. But 12 billion people had simply vanished, converted into energy to feed the hunger of the Void Hunters. Vorthak collapsed in his chair as the news reached the council chamber. His own homeworld and everyone he had ever known was gone. Around him, other delegates stared at the tactical displays in stunned silence, finally understanding what Ambassador Morrison had been trying to warn them about. "Send every available ship to find the humans," Zephyrian ordered, his crystal voice cracking with desperation. "Search every system they ever visited, every colony they ever built. We need their help now." But the search teams found nothing. Human space was empty, their worlds abandoned, their technology gone. It was as if humanity had simply decided to leave the galaxy entirely. taking all their knowledge and weapons with them. Some council members began to wonder if the humans had made a deal with the Void Hunters. Maybe they had traded information about galactic defenses in exchange for being spared. Others thought the humans had simply run away when they realized how hopeless the situation was. The truth was far more terrifying than any of them imagined. Humanity had not fled in fear or made deals with the enemy. They had simply moved the game to a playing field where they held all the advantages. And now they were waiting in the darkness between galaxies, watching as the Void Hunters took the bait. As system after system fell to the enemy advance, the once proud Galactic Council learned what it meant to ignore the warnings of a species that had spent its entire history fighting impossible odds and winning. 6 months had passed since the Council rejected humanity's final warning. Now Admiral Ben Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching Earth grow smaller in the main view screen. The sight made his chest tight with sadness, but he knew this was the only way to save his species. Around Earth, the sky was filled with ships, thousands and thousands of ships of every size, from massive colony vessels as big as cities to small family craft that could barely hold a dozen people. They rose from every spaceport on Earth like a swarm of metal birds, carrying humanity away from the only home they had ever known. Captain Amy Rodriguez walked up to Hayes with a tablet in her hands. Her face was serious but determined. "Sir, the last civilian transport just cleared Earth's atmosphere. The big colony ships from Luna and Mars are reporting successful launches too. Everyone who wanted to leave has made it off the planet." Hayes nodded and clasped his hands behind his back. He was an old soldier who had fought in the Martian Independence War 20 years ago. But this was the biggest military operation he had ever seen. "What are our final numbers, Captain?" 42 billion humans across 830 ships, Rodriguez replied. "We managed to save everyone who wanted to leave. The cargo holds are packed with genetic samples from every animal and plant on Earth, plus all our cultural databases and the equipment needed to build new cities wherever we end up." Some humans had chosen to stay on Earth. They were volunteers, who would maintain the automated defense systems that humanity was leaving behind. They knew they probably would not survive what was coming, but they wanted to help their species in the only way they could. Far out in the asteroid belt, Dr. Peter Grant worked frantically in his laboratory aboard the science vessel Horizon. Grant was 70 years old with white hair and thick glasses, but his mind was still the sharpest in human space. For the past 6 months, he had been working on humanity's most secret weapon. "The quantum resonance bombs are finally ready," Grant reported to Admiral Hayes through a secure communication channel. "Each bomb can break apart matter at the smallest level across a space 50,000 kilometers wide. When they go off, anything caught in the blast will simply stop existing." Grant's laboratory was filled with devices that most humans could not understand. The bombs looked like simple metal spheres, but inside them was technology that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Human scientists had been working on this technology for decades, but only the threat of the Void Hunters had given them the push to make it work. Meanwhile, on the industrial ship New Pittsburgh, Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan was overseeing the production of humanity's defensive technology. The ship's massive factories had been working non-stop for months, building equipment that would keep the human fleet hidden from enemy sensors. "The void shields are online and ready," Sullivan reported to the Admiral. "If our calculations are right, these shields can bend space and time around our ships. To any enemy sensors, we will look like empty space." Sullivan was a tough woman who had spent her whole career building things that others said were impossible. The void shields were her greatest achievement, using principles of physics that most alien species had never even imagined. The technology came from studying the way black holes affected space around them. The human fleet was not just running away. As they prepared to leave the galaxy, they were also setting traps. Hidden monitoring stations were placed throughout the solar system, disguised to look like asteroids or space debris. These stations would watch for the Void Hunters and send information to the human fleet wherever they ended up hiding. Automated defense platforms were hidden in the outer solar system too. These platforms carried the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built, but they would only fire when the trap was ready to be sprung. Until then, they would wait in silence like sleeping giants. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the evacuation from the Liberty's command center. Her screens showed the positions of every human ship as they formed up for the journey into dark space. Admiral, all vessels report ready for jump to hyperspace. The colony ships are loaded with supplies for 20 years, and the factory ships have everything needed to build new homes. Hayes looked at the tactical display showing Earth one last time. The planet looked peaceful and blue, with white clouds swirling over the continents where humanity had lived for thousands of years. Soon it would become a battlefield, but first it had to play its role as bait. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. He broadcast to the entire fleet. Today we leave our home, but we do not abandon our purpose. We carry with us the hopes and dreams of every human who ever lived. We will find a safe place to rebuild, and when the time is right, we will return to reclaim what is ours. Dr. Grant made final adjustments to his quantum bombs as the science ships prepared to jump. The dimensional resonance patterns are perfect, he muttered to himself as he worked. When these weapons detonate in sequence, they will create a chain reaction that should tear apart anything made of normal matter. The old scientist had spent his whole life studying the deepest mysteries of physics. Now he was using that knowledge to build weapons that could kill gods. It was not the legacy he had hoped for, but it was the legacy his species needed. Engineer Sullivan ran final tests on the void shield generators. The technology was so new that they were not completely sure it would work, but computer simulations showed it should make human ships invisible to almost any kind of sensor. Shield generators show green across the board, she reported. We are as ready as we will ever be. One by one, the human ships began to disappear as they jumped into hyperspace. They were not heading for any known star system or galaxy. Instead, they were going to the empty space between galaxies where they could hide and prepare for the war that was coming. The last ship to leave was Admiral Hayes's flagship. As the Liberty prepared to jump, Hayes took one final look at Earth. The planet was now surrounded by automated defense systems and monitoring stations, but it looked empty and abandoned. That was exactly what humanity wanted the Void Hunters to think. Jump coordinates locked in, reported the navigation officer. We are ready to leave, sir. Hayes straightened his uniform and looked around the bridge at his crew. These men and women would spend the next few years in the darkness between galaxies, preparing for a war that would determine the fate of all life in the Milky Way. Execute the jump, Hayes ordered. The Liberty vanished in a flash of light, following the rest of the human fleet into exile. Behind them, Earth waited in silence for the enemy to arrive. The trap was set, and now all humanity could do was wait for the Void Hunters to take the bait. In the empty space between galaxies, 42 billion humans began the hardest part of their journey. They had to stay hidden while building the most powerful war fleet in galactic history. They had to remain united while living in the cold darkness of deep space. And they had to keep hope alive while preparing for a battle that might be the last fight their species ever fought. The Council had ignored their warnings. Now humanity was gone, vanished into the void like they had never existed. But they would return, and when they did, the galaxy would see what humans could do when they were truly angry. 5 years after humanity vanished from the galaxy, the automated sensors around Earth detected something that made their creators proud. The massive Void Hunter fleet was finally entering the Sol system, drawn by the energy signatures of an apparently defenseless world. Hidden in the twisted space between dimensions, Admiral Ben Hayes watched the enemy arrive through screens that showed normal space. The past 5 years had aged him, turning his hair completely gray and adding deep lines to his face. But his eyes still burned with the fire of a man who had spent half a decade preparing for this moment. They are taking the bait perfectly, reported Commander Steve Blake from his position at the sensor station. Blake was younger than Hayes but had proven himself to be one of humanity's finest tactical officers during the years of exile. The entire main fleet is moving toward Earth orbit, just like we predicted. Around Hayes, the command center of Sanctuary 1 hummed with quiet activity. Sanctuary 1 was humanity's greatest achievement during their exile, a massive mobile base that existed partially outside normal space. It was bigger than any city that had ever been built on Earth, housing 42 billion humans and the most advanced technology their species had ever created. Dr. Peter Grant, now 75 years old but still sharp as a knife, monitored the dimensional readings from his science station. The past 5 years had turned his hair completely white and bent his back, but his mind remained the most brilliant in human space. The void shields are holding perfectly. They cannot detect us. In this phase-shifted space, as far as their sensors are concerned, we simply do not exist. The void shields were humanity's greatest defensive achievement. During their exile, human scientists had learned to bend space and time itself, hiding their entire fleet in the gaps between dimensions. They could see out into normal space, but nothing in normal space could see them. Captain Amy Rodriguez coordinated fleet movements from her position at the tactical display. The years of exile had promoted her to Admiral Rodriguez, commanding one of the 3 main battle groups of the human fleet. All ships report ready for combat. We have 800 vessels positioned throughout the system, each one carrying a full load of quantum resonance bombs. The human fleet had grown during the years of exile. The factory ships had worked constantly, building new vessels and weapons using resources mined from asteroids in the dark space between galaxies. Every ship was equipped with technology that made the old human fleet look like toys. Engineer Kate Sullivan, now the chief of all human military technology, activated the first phase of their carefully planned counterattack. Quantum mines are active throughout the Sol system. Dimensional anchors are locked in place. When we spring this trap, nothing will escape. Sullivan had spent the exile years designing weapons that most people could not even imagine. The quantum mines were invisible to normal sensors and could exist in multiple dimensions at the same time. When they exploded, they would tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The Void Hunters settled into their feeding formation around Earth, completely unaware that they were being watched by 42 billion angry humans. The alien ships were even more horrifying up close than they had appeared on long-range sensors. Each one was a twisted mixture of organic tissue and advanced technology, pulsing with biomechanical life. The enemy began their feeding process, extending massive tentacle-like appendages toward Earth. These feeding tubes started draining the planet's atmosphere and cracking its crust, preparing to consume all the matter and energy that the world contained. They had done this same process to hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. "Sir," reported Commander Blake, "the enemy is fully committed to the feeding process. All their ships are locked in position around Earth. They will not be able to move quickly when we attack." Hayes nodded grimly. The plan was working perfectly so far. The Void Hunters thought they had found an easy meal, but they were about to discover that Earth was the most dangerous trap ever set in the history of the galaxy. Admiral Rodriguez checked the positions of her battle groups one more time. Battle Group Alpha is positioned above the North Pole. Battle Group Beta is hidden in the asteroid belt. Battle Group Gamma is ready to hit them from the direction of Jupiter. Every ship has target locks on the enemy command vessels. Dr. Grant made final adjustments to the quantum resonance bombs that would begin the attack. The dimensional resonance patterns are perfect. When these weapons detonate, they will create a chain reaction that propagates through the enemy fleet's organic components. Their own biology will become a weapon against them. The quantum resonance bombs were based on a discovery that human scientists had made during the exile years. The Void Hunters' ships were partially biological, and their organic components all resonated at the same quantum frequency. When that frequency was disrupted, the ships would literally tear themselves apart from the inside. Engineer Sullivan monitored the dimensional anchor systems that would prevent any enemy ships from escaping. Anchors are charged and ready. When we activate them, they will lock this entire star system out of hyperspace. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The dimensional anchors were another invention born from humanity's years of exile. They created a bubble in space-time that made faster-than-light travel impossible. Any ship caught inside the bubble would be trapped until the anchors were shut down. Hayes took a deep breath and looked around the command center at his officers. These men and women had spent 5 years preparing for this battle, working and training in the cold darkness between galaxies. They had sacrificed their homes, their comfortable lives, and in many cases their families to be here at this moment. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes," he broadcast on the fleet-wide communication channel. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you ignore humanity's warnings. Today we demonstrate what our species is capable of when we are truly angry. The Void Hunters thought they could consume our homeworld, like they consumed hundreds of others. They are about to learn that Earth is different because Earth belongs to humanity. He paused for a moment, thinking about all the civilizations that had been destroyed while the human fleet prepared for this battle. Trillions of innocent beings had died because the Galactic Council had been too proud to accept human help. The enemy has taken our planet, Hayes continued. They think they have won an easy victory, but they do not understand that humanity does not give up our worlds without a fight. Today we take back what is ours and we make sure that no other species will ever have to face this threat again. Hayes looked at his tactical officer. Commander Blake, signal all battle groups. Execute Operation Lazarus. Operation Lazarus is a go, Blake announced. All ships attack formation. Let them see what humanity has learned in the dark. The human fleet began to materialize from the spaces between dimensions like avenging angels emerging from the void. Ship after ship appeared around the Sol system, their hulls gleaming with weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. The Void Hunters suddenly found themselves surrounded by a force they had not even known existed. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to discover that making an enemy of humanity was the last mistake the Void Hunters would ever make. The battle for Earth lasted 18 hours and changed the nature of warfare forever. When it began, the Void Hunters controlled the Sol system with their massive biomechanical fleet. When it ended, humanity had proven that some species should never be underestimated. As the first human ships materialized from dimensional space, the Void Hunters reacted with confusion rather than fear. Their sensors had detected nothing until the human fleet suddenly appeared around them like ghosts, becoming solid. The alien ships tried to break off their feeding on Earth and turn to face this new threat, but they were too late. Dr. Peter Grant watched from his station as the first wave of quantum resonance bombs detonated throughout the enemy fleet. Direct hits on the primary feeding clusters, he reported with grim satisfaction. The quantum resonance is propagating through their organic components exactly as predicted. The bombs did not explode like normal weapons. Instead, they created waves of energy that passed harmlessly through metal and rock, but tore apart anything that was alive. The Void Hunter ships, being part biological, began to unravel at the molecular level as their own organic components turned against them. Giant bioships that had been consuming planets for millions of years simply ceased to exist as the quantum resonance spread through their living tissue. Where massive alien vessels had floated moments before, there was now only empty space and scattered debris. Admiral Rodriguez commanded Battle Group Alpha as they attacked the enemy's command ships. Target their neural nodes, she ordered over the communication system. Intelligence reports show that the whole fleet is controlled from those central vessels. Her ships launched quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. The torpedoes could not be detected by normal sensors and could not be stopped by normal shields. They passed through the enemy's defenses like they were not there and struck the command vessels directly. The Void Hunter fleet began to lose coordination as their command ships were destroyed. Individual vessels that had moved together like parts of a single organism now drifted aimlessly, unable to receive orders from their destroyed nerve centers. Engineer Kate Sullivan activated the dimensional anchor system from her control station. Anchors are online and fully charged, she reported. The entire Sol system is now locked out of hyperspace. Nothing escapes until we let it escape. The dimensional anchors created a bubble around the star system that made faster than light travel impossible. Any Void Hunter ship that tried to flee found itself trapped in normal space, unable to jump to safety. They were locked in the system with an angry human fleet that had spent 5 years preparing for this fight. Captain Steve Blake coordinated the second wave of attacks from his tactical station. Battle Group Beta is moving in from the asteroid belt. They are targeting the enemy's feeding apparatus with antimatter charges. The human ships that emerged from the asteroid belt were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. During their exile, humanity had learned to harvest antimatter from the space between galaxies. Now they used it to power weapons that could annihilate matter on contact. The Void Hunters' feeding tentacles, which had been draining Earth's atmosphere and crust, were severed by antimatter blasts that erased them completely. The alien ships recoiled in pain and confusion as their feeding apparatus was destroyed. But the true genius of humanity's attack was not just the advanced weapons. It was the strategy that turned the enemy's greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The Void Hunters had evolved to consume matter and energy from normal space, but humans had been preparing in dimensional space using resources that existed outside normal physics. Dr. Grant activated the dimensional implosion bombs that had been hidden throughout the system during the years of preparation. Implosion charges are armed and ready. These should create recursive feedback loops in their consumption matrix. The implosion bombs were humanity's most terrifying weapon. When they detonated, they created tears in space-time that drew everything nearby into collapsing pocket dimensions. The Void Hunters' own consumption abilities made them especially vulnerable to this attack, as their feeding mechanisms tried to absorb energy from the collapsing dimensions and were pulled in themselves. Admiral Hayes watched from Sanctuary 1, as entire sections of the enemy fleet were drawn into dimensional tiers that folded space in on itself. Void Hunter ships that had survived for millions of years were trapped in recursive loops where they tried to consume themselves, creating endless cycles of destruction. "Sir," reported Commander Blake, "we are detecting massive secondary explosions throughout the enemy fleet. Their biomechanical systems are failing catastrophically." The Void Hunters had never encountered weapons like these before. In millions of years of consuming civilizations across multiple galaxies, they had never faced an enemy that could hide in dimensional space or turn the laws of physics into weapons. Engineer Sullivan monitored the battle from her engineering station as human ships phased in and out of normal space like deadly phantoms. "Void shield systems are performing perfectly. We can attack and disappear before they can respond. They cannot hit what they cannot see." The human fleet used tactics that seemed impossible to the enemy. Ships would appear just long enough to fire their weapons, then vanish back into dimensional space before return fire could reach them. It was like fighting an enemy made of smoke and lightning. As the battle continued, the Void Hunter fleet began to collapse under the sustained assault. Ships that had terrorized entire sectors of the galaxy were reduced to drifting hulks or pulled into dimensional tiers. The organic neural networks that controlled the fleet were disrupted by quantum resonance, leaving individual ships isolated and helpless. Admiral Rodriguez led the final assault on the enemy command structure. "All ships, focus fire on the primary hive node. Intelligence indicates that destroying it will shut down the remaining fleet." The primary hive node was a massive bioship at the center of the enemy formation, easily the size of a small moon. It pulsed with organic lights and was protected by the heaviest concentration of defensive systems in the fleet. But it was also the key to the entire enemy operation. Human ships converged on the hive node from all directions, unleashing weapons that defied conventional understanding of physics. Quantum resonance bombs disrupted its biological systems, antimatter charges erased its defensive weapons, and dimensional tiers began to pull it apart. The hive node fought back with weapons that could crack planets, but the human ships were too fast and too well protected. They phased in and out of normal space, striking like lightning and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Dr. Grant monitored the final moments of the battle from his science station. "The hive node's neural matrix is collapsing. Quantum resonance has disrupted the entire network. The fleet is going dark." One by one, the remaining Void Hunter ships shut down as their connection to the hive mind was severed. Without central coordination, they drifted helplessly in space like massive corpses. The fleet that had consumed hundreds of civilizations was finally defeated. As the last enemy ship went dark, Admiral Hayes broadcast to the entire human fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. The Sol system is secure. Earth is free. The Void Hunter threat has been eliminated." Cheers erupted throughout the human fleet as 42 billion people celebrated their victory. They had spent 5 years in exile preparing for this moment. They had sacrificed their homeworld and lived in the darkness between galaxies, but they had won. 3 months later, Ambassador Jake Morrison stood once again before the Galactic Council. But this time the Great Hall was nearly empty. Most of the civilizations that had once filled these seats had been consumed by the Void Hunters before humanity's intervention. "You ignored our warnings," Morrison said quietly to the few surviving council members. "You called us paranoid and aggressive. You refused our offers of alliance when we could have saved everyone." Speaker Zephyrian, his crystal form cracked and dimmed by the trauma of losing most of his people, could barely speak. "We made a terrible mistake. The council was wrong to reject your help. Can humanity find it in their hearts to forgive us?" Morrison looked around at the empty seats where thousands of delegates had once sat. Most of those species were gone now, their worlds consumed, and their people turned into energy for the Void Hunter fleet. The price of the council's arrogance had been measured in the deaths of trillions. "Humanity is gone, Speaker," Morrison replied. "We died with Earth when we chose exile over submission. What stands before you now is something new. We are the Guardians, those who remain to protect the galaxy from threats that others cannot see or will not believe." The few surviving council members looked confused and frightened by Morrison's words. They did not understand what humanity had become during their years in the void between galaxies. "The galaxy is under our protection now," Morrison continued. "We will watch from the spaces between dimensions, and we will act when necessary. We will not ask for permission again, and we will not wait for council approval when civilizations are threatened." As the human delegation prepared to leave Nexus Prime, they transmitted a message that was broadcast on every communication frequency in the galaxy. It was simple and direct.